Hello and welcome to The Agenda with me, Graham Hughes, and Phil Moorhouse. Hello, Phil. How you doing?
I'm all right. I haven't been anywhere.
Oh, well, I'm a bit knackered. We had a message in the chat from Vendetta saying, didn't make it this morning, as was knackered. Like, yesterday I got in we went to Greece on holiday, and we got in 3 o'clock in the morning, and then I had to get a taxi to my mate's house in Handforth, as in, you don't have the authority, Handforth. And then I had to drive back to Liverpool, have a few hours sleep, then got up, went to St George's Hall to go and see the mosaic floor. No, not mosaic, the tile floor you can't normally see. And then drove 3 hours back to Durham. And then, so I was a bit tired last night. But I'm back. Nobody cares. Right. So we're going to talk a little bit today about what's been happening in the news and in politics in the UK. And obviously it's the summer, so there's not usually that much going on. However, the Tories seem to be in the news and on the front pages of the newspapers every day this week. And today the latest reads is about, obviously there's a big thing about the migrant boat, which is apparently making money for Tory donors.
Well, of course it is. Yes.
In where it's docked. We've also got Theresa Villiers, who is the Environment Secretary of State for the Environment.
She was for a bit over half a year.
And she has £70,000 in shares in Shell. Nice. Yeah. And today it was in all the newspapers that our number of migrants has gone over 100,000 coming on boats, and that can we just stress that is over 5 years.
Yeah,
it's only actually 20,000.
Yeah, the actual they inflate the numbers drastically. The actual numbers are very small, not only compared to comparable countries, or even uncomparable countries like much smaller countries, but also compared to immigration in general. It's a tiny number. It's just that we're not dealing with it very well. And it's very difficult at the moment to tell whether we're not dealing with it very well because the Tories see benefit in going, oh, it's all their fault, or just because they're useless. Because either could be true, because it's not actually helping them. It's not helping them. Rishi Sunak's getting really upset because, after Uxbridge, he thought, oh, we can push on from this. And it's like, what do you mean Labour even further ahead in the polls now? And when you talk about,
it's not working, is it, Phil? It's just the strategy is just.
And this is the thing, like Labour aren't even doing anything. Like Labour melted down over Uxbridge, so it's like not even like Labour really took the initiative away from Sunak. They haven't done anything. I mean, what I'm quite surprised is what's not in the news. Because I remember a few months ago, so Labour were launching their 5 mission areas formally, and there was lots of speeches. And I remember Starmer did a speech on the day that Rishi Sunak, I think it was announcing the Windsor Framework. So that completely overshadowed Starmer's speech. Now, these things happen. He may have actually deliberately gone with that day to overshadow his speech. But, you think? It may have done, but it doesn't matter. It's the sort of thing that can happen. Whereas now it's summer. I mean, if I look on the BBC front page, there's not a lot. All that's been in the news is the asylum thing again, but that's not news, really. No, it's just another row. The Daily Telegraph's trying to say that actually the European Convention on Human Rights is bad for Britain. Ben Habib is going, oh, well, we only made the European Convention on Human Rights to civilize Europe. Like we were missionaries in Europe. We only did it to civilize Europe. Now that they are civilized, which is not what he said about them when we were in the EU, but now that they are civilized, we don't need it anymore.
Sorry, just to jump in. Breaking news from Sky News, just been put up. Asylum seekers to be moved off Bibi Stockholm barge after Legionella bacteria found. They found Legionella in the water on the barge, and so now they're going to be taken. I'm laughing, but
the thing that it's like everything else. It's a cock up from start to finish. It was a cock up to begin with because they only actually managed to move a few people onto it in the first place. It's utterly ridiculous. I mean, this one is in Dorset. It's the only place they've been able to find to get anywhere to dock it. They tried to dock one in Liverpool. Liverpool told them to sod off. They tried to dock one in was it Edinburgh, and they told them to get knotted as well. So it's like we hired these barges, right? Have you got somewhere for them to dock? No, we're an island. Well, surely we could find somewhere. Well, this is the mark of the competence of the Tory government. They hired barges at great expense to us, but don't
Yeah.
worry, there's plenty of Tory donors making out of it. And they didn't actually think that maybe they need to be birthed somewhere.
I'm unsure Jim Jams are saying they'll do better with Frank Spencer in charge. At least Frank Spencer had a heart. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
He did actually
tried
love
to,
Betty.
he was a nice man, yeah.
He was a nice bloke. He just, everything went wrong for him.
Yeah.
You know? But like the Tories are just horrible. But what they've done is, you know, this thing in they talk about in capitalism that they like to privatize the profits and socialize the losses.
Yeah.
The Tories are fantastic at privatizing our money, our like taxpayers' money. That are finding ways to spend it so that someone makes can buy a yacht or something.
See, this is why they give an extra reason why we should be in Horizon. There's like delays on Horizon. The Tories go, oh, we don't want to be in Horizon. Why not? Because we'll be net contributors. Like, well, yeah, we are. There's always going to be net contributors. But our economy still gains way more.
Yeah.
Oh, you could just spend it on our own research. It's like, no, because we won't have any scientists to carry out the research. They need we can't attract people into this country without these international research programs.
So Horizon
they don't understand how it works.
Horizon is the biggest international research
pissing New Zealand's in it. New Zealand's joined it before us.
And it includes things like CERN, you know, like the cutting edge of particle physics. And then people go, oh, I don't see how particle physics really helps, you know, me in my life. Well, think of the medical aspects, things like the MRI machines that we have now, quite common in hospitals.
Tunneling, electron microscopes, things like that.
Yeah, there's so much stuff that comes from the science that is done to try and discover what are the building blocks of life. So Phil, you're a bit of a physicist, aren't you?
Yes.
Yes. In a previous life, in a previous incarnation, previous evolution. So have you heard that they've just nearly found, or they think they may have found, a fifth fundamental force?
So I'm always a bit skeptical of things like this, because if there's one group of people other than politicians who embellishes things, it's scientists. And the reason for that, honestly, I can. And the reason is because they're constantly changing funding. You know, so they're always at it. You know, oh, we've nearly cracked this thing. Oh, this discovery. Oh, we need some more money. You see,
green hydrogen. It's always found the corner.
Until something's actually been proven and peer reviewed, you have to look at it as they're constantly changing. I mean, you know, who was it who said, famous physicist,
Rutherford.
No, Bernard. It might have been Berners-Lee, the internet guy. I can't remember, but some famous British professor. No, it wasn't. It was Higgs, Professor Higgs. That was it.
Of the Higgs boson fame.
Yeah. He was saying that he couldn't have come up with his ideas in the current academic environment, because this was back when academics could just afford to just sit in a study thinking. Coming up with ideas. Now they can't. They're constantly chasing the next grant.
So how does Horizon fit in with that, though? Does Horizon?
Horizon will allow us to attract the caliber of scientists that we then, who will then be able to attract scientists to work on other things that we do fund, other research. We need those centers of excellence, those hubs set up to attract. You know, you can attract top scientists to particular universities because you've got so and so working there. Oh, they're a top bloke. I'll go and work there. Whereas you know, you can't. It's not just a case of, oh, we'll give this university some money to research this thing. If it's like, well, but it's like a football team. You know, when Man United, for example, got taken over after Sir Alex Ferguson, and all of a sudden they couldn't attract the best players.
You're talking about managers.
Yeah, so they couldn't attract the best players. It's a similar thing in science. You know, to attract the best academics, you actually need the best academics already working for you.
Right, to get more. But there's things that could be done better, I think, in science, like obviously the way peer reviews are done and things like that. I mean, but generally speaking, I will always take the word of a noted scientist over that of a politician.
On a matter of science, I will. But we also have to understand that they are in the PR game as well, because they are competing for grants.
My God. That must be quite difficult for them. Like, they're not necessarily
because that's not exactly, it's wasting their time.
Yeah.
They
Oh, yeah,
can be
that
doing
too.
without it. You know, they don't like it. They don't even like students, some of them. You know, I had plenty of lecturers who just didn't like students. They
Oh,
had
yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah.
It's
They're
you
working on
know,
the next
we got in
paper.
the way of their research.
Yeah, exactly. Do they get paid for how many students they educate or how many students get like firsts? There's no Ofsted
No,
inspections, is there?
no.
It's how many papers you publish affects how much you get paid. So or how much money you get. But like yeah, Justin says Cambridge has no surrounding infrastructure like roads
Oh
and
yeah.
rail. It works
So this,
nicely as is academically renowned.
well, this might also be related to the news. This because Michael Gove and Rishi Sunak were, oh, we want to make Cambridge this international science hub, and then the problem is that the Cambridge Council are going, yeah, but we ain't got the infrastructure. You know, we're trying to build the houses and you're blocking us. So Cambridge, like council, are saying we're actually trying to build the houses you're going to need, and you're blocking us, you stupid fannies. So it's not really working out.
Well, nothing the
They're just-
Tories
it's like-
want
it's like
to do seems
Rishi
to
Sunak-
work, does it?
The more he goes on, the more Rishi Sunak is just like Boris Johnson. He was always, oh, just going to do this thing. I'll just dream big and it'll happen. We'll do
Yeah.
this thing. Rishi Sunak, we'll build this, you know, world leading. We'll build Silicon Valley in Cambridge. It's like, it's a great idea. How are you going to do it there? Oh, you want a plan? Oh, I don't have a plan.
It's very frustrating. It's like dealing with stoners who are like, oh, it's a great idea, and you're like, okay, go and do it. Oh no, I can't be asked. It's like, I find that's probably one of the most frustrating things for me is talkers, people who just talk all the time and don't actually do anything. Especially if they get in my way, especially if I'm trying to achieve something, if I've got a goal, and they waste my time. And then disappear after, you know, I was like, okay, then I'm here. Let's go. Let's do the show right now. As Phil will testify, I do get a little bit cranky about that. But yeah, so when we're talking about sort of what Labour's been up to this week, I mean, someone reminded me actually that Diane Abbott is no longer she's no longer got the Labour Party whip.
Yeah, she did a racism, and then she reminded us all why she's not a Labour MP.
And But there was a thing this week where Leanderthal, he said that people should F off back to France. And there was someone on who called up the radio, called up Sheila Fogarty, and they were in tears talking about a friend of theirs who was beaten so badly they ended up in hospital back in 2016 after the Brexit vote, who was told exactly that as they were being beaten up. And then Diane Abbott responded to Leanderthal with the point about you know, it was obviously a clumsily made point. I could see what she was trying to get at. But,
but it was
God, the way she put it across,
stupid way to put it. It's like using people's. It comes across as using deaths just to fire a cheap political shot.
Exactly, and it's you just don't go there. I mean, I don't know what happened to Diane Abbott. She used to be quite sort of intelligent, so she came across as quite intelligent, and then.
I'll tell you what, though, if anyone was cheering up, this is my third video today. So Lee Anderson's not happy either.
Oh, good.
Because you would think
is that because his son is vegan?
No, that's completely
worse than that.
I don't even think he really cares about that. I think he's just trying to drum up support for his show. He was trying. It's obvious he was trying to get a reaction, right? Because dropping the F-bomb, it's clearly there to get a reaction. But it turns out there's an article in the Express. He went to the Express where he basically revealed what he wanted. He wanted Keir Starmer to react. He's really upset that Starmer's ignored him. He's like, look at me, pay attention to me. No. And it's really tragic. I was reading this article, as well as you can read an article in the Express. It's one of those that's got like adverts everywhere. And in one point, it actually says Lee Anderson's asked the Express to like challenge Labour to come out of the shadows on this. It's like he's so desperate. He tried to do this thing to get a reaction because I mean, it depends what he's doing it for. Is he doing it to build up his following for his failing GB News show, or is he doing it to appeal to Tory voters so that later down he's obviously going to lose his seat, but he could easily pop up somewhere else? Like there's going to be quite a few Tory constituencies that are proper Tory constituencies that get lost, but will flip back at the following election. They'll flip back, right? So he could easily pop up there, and he might be wanting to endear himself by saying what a good bruiser he is. Oh, look, I can distract Keir Starmer. All I have to do is say something, and he's all over me because I wind him up. I press his buttons. I think that's what he wants.
God,
He
it's
wants to be
pathetic,
that
isn't
person
it?
to make himself useful.
This is like
But
a
he's
grown
not.
up.
Starmer's just, it's like the kid on, the way I described it's like the kid at the swimming pool about to dive in. They think that's in Tom Daly going, Mum, look at me. And Mum's not interested. She's having her pina colada. And that's what he's like. Daddy Starmer, look at me. Look what I said. I said a swear.
Yeah.
Respond to me.
But also,
and
I mean,
Starmer's
Vendetta's,
just going, no, I'm busy, mate.
Vendetta's mentioned in the chat there that what 30p said is a hate crime.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, there's no two ways about it. If you were found to have said that in your job, even if you're just working at Starbucks or something, you'd be fired. Lee
Anderson has actually punched someone on camera, and he got away with it. There was no police investigation.
Did he?
There was someone. Obviously, they're not exactly a fan of his, and they were asking him questions on the street, and someone was filming it on mobile phone. He just lamped him.
Bloody hell.
And nothing happened. He nicked Steve Bray's. In fact, did he nick his phone at one point? He nicked his hat at one point.
Yeah.
He effectively assaulted Steve Bray.
He seems like a very angry little man.
Well, he's an incredibly angry, hateful, spiteful little goblin. But he's getting away with it. So it'll just encourage him to carry on with this.
Do you think that he's doing more damage to the Tory party, though? Do you think there's a point of like where Tory voters are like, this isn't what I signed up for?
The thing is, yes, there are people he appeals to, and there are people that the Tories can appeal to through him, but they're largely in areas that, when it comes down to it, are not going to vote for it. We're talking about a lot of the areas he comes from, like red wall areas, where immigration is a higher issue. But what's the highest issue of all is the money in their pocket, right? And they voted Tory because they were convinced that the money in their pocket there would actually be some money in their pockets, and that hasn't happened. It's actually worse. So they will appeal to some of those voters, but they won't appeal to enough to win those seats. And I think his sort of antics probably do piss off the sort of more what you call conservatives with a small c, which are the ones in the seats that are actually now marginal. Were safe seats, will be again, but for now are marginal. And I don't think he does them any favours there.
Do you you did a video this week about Labour being a bit too timid, and are they being too timid?
In some areas, I would say.
Because it was, who was it, Max bloody thingy from the Tory party, who's a former Tory a Tory grandee now. He was on the TV the other day saying that Labour are too timid. He'd like to see them, bring the fight a little bit. But I mean,
the problem is they are scared. It's a bit like, I suppose, being on a first date and you're sort of a bit scared because you say the wrong thing and you've blown the old gaff. So they're worried about that. There is a fear of losing the next election, which is fine. And I certainly wouldn't want them to be reckless. It's just that I think there are some issues which are not issues for voters, and they can take whatever position they like on that and be confident about it. So the trans issues was one for me. We know when people are thinking, who shall I vote for? That's not what they base that decision on. Apart from, ironically, people who are trans or know someone who is trans and is struggling. Those are the only people who are likely to base their general election vote.
I mean, there are a lot of people who would like to see the whip withdrawn, for example, for Rosie Duffield, for some of the comments that she's made, transphobic comments. And I don't think that would be a particular vote loser for Labour to do. So I don't understand why they're not doing it. If it's not
they've actually apologised to her now. As I say, Labour, Wes Streeting apologised. Labour basically flipped on a position. And again, I think they got it wrong. I think they've got that wrong. They didn't need to. I'm not saying, I don't know enough to know if their position was exactly right anyway or whatever. What I do know is politically, they didn't have to flip that position. So, but I also wouldn't favour removing the whip from her. Because otherwise, what you're doing, removing the whip has to be, for my money, you have to be. It's not just expressing views that are different to like the official party position. Lots of backbenchers do that. We want some backbenchers to do that, for example. We want Labour backbenchers, for example, to criticise Brexit. But you really have to be doing something that outrages the public, and it's not outraging the public. They'll just disagree with her. It's not like she's forming policy. Just don't make her the equalities minister.
Caradon there in the chat is saying the problem with withdrawing the whip from Rosie Duffield is the media fallout will be quite damaging.
Yeah.
So she's being protected by the Murdoch media. Great. I'd love to be in that position.
But no, I'd see no reason. She doesn't make enough of a breakthrough. I mean, they had no choice with, say, Diane Abbott because, particularly when it was anti-Semitic. I mean, that is like still a really sensitive issue.
Yeah. But that was just so heartbreaking. I mean, I don't think there's any MP who has had as much stick as Diane Abbott.
Oh, there isn't. Absolutely. I absolutely concur with that.
Reasons that are obvious to anyone who's lived in this country
for the
last 44 years.
Yeah, the problem is that when people are themselves the victims of abuse, it goes one of two ways. You either want to help people avoid being victims themselves, or you become the next generation of abuser. And it is sad. You've said it yourself. It is sad. I mean, I was someone who looked up to people like Diane Abbott and Jeremy Corbyn in the 80s when I was getting turned on to politics. But I've always been quite pragmatic. I'm about outcomes. What are the outcomes of what you're doing? I'm not interested in what your motivation is. I'm not interested in what you're trying to achieve. What are you actually achieving? Yeah. Because if it's harmful, then I'm not really a fan.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that the proof is in the pudding at the moment when it comes to what Labour are doing. And I know we like to criticise and say they could be doing this better and maybe they should think about doing this. And I wish they would support this particular policy. Mine, obviously, being closer integration with the EU and all that kind of stuff, and not ruling out going back into the single market, etc.
Yeah.
However, proof is in the pudding.
Yeah,
they're 20 points ahead in the polls still.
Well,
I mean, they're just
it's
slamming them.
It is on YouGov 22. So this is what's enraging. Sunak is gone. We're going to go for it. We're going to do the street fighting. We're going to fight dirty. We're going to, what did they do? They did something that everyone was outraged about, and I've completely forgotten about it. And that was that crap. Something they accused Starmer of, was it?
Being funded by Just Stop Oil when they're funded by literal oil.
Was it that? No, it was something else. I've completely forgotten it was that crap.
Covey-Gate?
No,
he bought a field for his dear old man,
bought
so
a
she
donkey
can
sanctuary.
A donkey sanctuary on it. How dare he?
But whatever it was, like they spent the last few weeks thinking they can fight dirty, and it's Labour have just gone ahead in the polls again on YouGov, and it's no different, on other polls really. It's just not working, and Sunak's getting really frustrated, and he's like, you just want to sort of say to him, have you ever thought of listening to voters? No, I just want to make money out of them, but I want them to vote for me as well. Well, which do you want? Which do you want more? Because he's probably pissed off because previous Tory leaders have gotten away with it. They've gotten away with not listening to the public, but they make a show of listening to the public. And he also needs to understand, after 13 years in power, anyone's going to struggle. Even if you're a good government, and they've been very far from a good government, but even if you had done your best, you're going to struggle after 13 years, because after 13 years, the opposition who've been in opposition for 13 years are saying, we can do better. You might be okay with what they're doing, but we can do even better. And that's what the Tories did after 13 years of Labour, because even given the financial crash, people were still better off in 2010 than they were in 1997. Yeah. But they were being told, David Cameron was saying to them, but we can do even better. We can do the same things, and we can do it for less money.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm looking at the Politico chart here, and since December the 3rd, 2021, Labour have been ahead. And obviously that lead grew massively when Liz Truss became Prime
Yeah.
Minister. And we had
Yeah,
this
the lettuce
massive,
wars, I'm calling it
just
now. But yeah.
insane peak when the Tories went down to like 20% and Labour were on 52%. Obviously, Labour haven't quite stayed up that high, but they're still on
No.
46, 45%. I mean, that is a lot.
Yeah.
That's more than you need for a landslide. You only
Of
need
course it is, yeah.
43% for a landslide. And the
Yeah.
Tories are just not recovering any kind of, you know,
No.
from when Rishi Sunak came in, they were looking at like 27%
Yeah,
on November the 6th
within a
last
few
year.
weeks, yeah,
And
within
they're
a
on
few
26.
weeks, the Tory share of the polling, shall we say, went up. It took no time at all to recover, but then it's not gone anywhere. It's just flat.
John Hart just mentioned in the chat. Thank you very much for the £5 super chat there, John. Starmer is someone wearing slippery shoes, carrying a priceless Ming vase over a frozen lake. One slip and it crashes. Yeah,
that is certainly their fear. But as like if it comes to the economy, I'd say absolutely. The economy is always foremost in people's minds. You have to be very careful there. But there are some issues that just don't determine people's votes. And you've got license there. You don't have to change your position on something. And it's like, what is the reasoning? Is it fear of headlines? Because I know that the front bench keep getting asked questions by clickbait journalists about, oh, what's a woman? And it's like, but they're going to get that anyway, or they'll get some other stupid question. If they are the sort of journalist who does that, is not interested in your policies. They're interested in frustrating your message. If they are hell bent on frustrating your message, they're going to do it anyway. So,
but do you think that sort of Labour politicians might want to just make a list of the people to avoid in that respect? Like, Keir Starmer going and talking to, say, Nick Ferrari, he knows he's going to get that kind of response, isn't he? He's going to that kind of question.
He's not interested in Nick Ferrari. He's interested in Nick Ferrari's listeners, and he has to appeal to those people.
Well, here's another thing as well. From what I've seen, I don't think he's got any interest in appealing necessarily to Tory voters or Brexit voters.
But not all of them are.
But I think that he's just trying not to scare them. That's the thing. So they'll tolerate the idea of a Labour government because still got people out there who, being interviewed. I know Vox Pops is just anecdotal and it's not reflected necessarily in the stats. But you still get people who say, I can't abide the idea of a Labour government. I'm going to vote Tory. I know they're terrible. I know they're awful and I hate them, but I'm going to vote for them anyway because a Labour government will destroy everything that I know.
But do you think that the other way around as well? Like there were things that Tony Blair did that I didn't like powerfully didn't like, but I still voted for him. The same reason. Because I believed a Tory government would be worse. Now I'm going to sit here and go, yeah, but I'm right. Well, they think they're right. So I don't really criticize that attitude. There are people who just believe it, and they genuinely believe it. There are grifters, but there are lots of people who genuinely believe it. So,
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that Starmer, I don't think he's trying to get those people
he's not trying to get to
vote
those
for Labour, but he's trying to get them to maybe just stay home on election day because.
But there are votes he also does need to attract. The ones who will be with Labour economically, but voted Tory, for other reasons at the last election.
Yes, I
mean they're winnable.
We've got to acknowledge the fact that Corbyn mobilised a lot of people to vote for the Tories for fear of him becoming Prime Minister.
Well, I don't know because he just put a lot of people off. Boris Johnson didn't get very many more votes than Theresa May.
Yes,
like a few 100,000. It was really that Labour lost 2 million.
Yeah, people just didn't turn out.
Yeah. Or well, compared to 2017, of course, when there were lots of people voted Labour tactically as to try and do something about Brexit. It's like, well, we'd rather Labour dealt with it than the Conservatives.
Yeah. And don't forget that was only Jeremy Corbyn had only been in the job for about 6 months at that point, so he was sort of an untested quality.
It was quite new, yeah.
But yeah, there were a lot of people that I saw on TV or even spoke to in real life who were absolutely terrified of the idea of Corbyn being in charge of the country.
I spoke to someone. There was lots of other activists said the same thing when they were knocking on the doors, and some of the activists that were reporting back to our CLP were huge Jeremy Corbyn fans, absolutely massive, even at the time, and they were reporting back, people won't vote for him. They won't vote for him.
I mean, there's a point in here where, okay, I do get that he was attacked by the right-wing press.
Yeah,
but that
of course.
happens to every
It happens absolutely everyone.
Labour
It's how you
leader.
defend
That
it.
happened to Ed Miliband. He ate a bacon butty in a funny way,
Yeah.
and that was it.
Yeah.
That was the end of it.
It wasn't even worse than the way Theresa May attacked those chips, and yet that wasn't widely reported.
But what sort of wound me up at the time was the fact that he didn't interact with media that would have been friendly, or you think would have been friendly, like Channel 4.
No,
or James O'Brien on LBC and that kind of person.
But anyone, it's echo chamber politics. It's like, if you're not one of us, it's fortress mentality. If you're not one of us, like even if you're on our side, we don't really trust you. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's in the past now. But we were just talking about Starmer at the moment, the Starmer's Labour Party, and what we can see from the outside looking in of what their sort of policy about getting the next election in the bag is, and it does very much feel like he does not want to spook the horses.
No.
Shout out to One Angry Pagan for £1 super chat. Thanks, mate. That's cool. But yes, someone said in the chat we're forgetting about the unicorn in the room rejoin the EU. We'll be too old to enjoy it at this rate, and we've spoken a lot about the European Union, and obviously we started I mean, I don't know about you, but I started doing these videos on YouTube as a result of the Brexit referendum and the madness that followed it. I am now taking a more pragmatic view on rejoining, and I can't see it happening this decade. Can't see it happening until the 2030s.
Well, I can't, but I also don't rule it out, and because I am quite interested. Like I said, you look at the polling at the moment, and you can sort of see increasing support for rejoining, and more specifically, lack of support, much less support for staying out. And yes, it's not being tested because no one seriously thinks we're about to rejoin. But that's with the electorate as it is now. But the electorate as it is now is going to change in potentially 3 ways, definitely 2 ways.
Yeah,
and potentially 3 ways.
You did a video about this, didn't you? About 16 and 17
I do it all the time.
Year-olds?
Do it all the time, because it's people need to keep remembering it, and remember it. We're not fixed. The electorate is not fixed. We know, and this is obviously really, the first one is really macabre. Sorry about that, but the fact of the matter is that 70% of older people voted leave. That meant 30% didn't. Thank you very much. But 70% voted leave. 70% of young people voted remain. Well, the young people are mostly still about, and the older people are mostly knocking on death's door. So that naturally changes things. And it's not like people become more fearful as they get older. The reason the elderly generation voted for Brexit was not just because they're old, and then the middle-aged ones, as they become older, suddenly go, oh yeah, Brexit, brilliant. It was because it's like anything else. The Brexiteers appealed to their rose-tinted glasses. Weren't the good old days good when we were in the EU? It's like, no. When people say that, they're not really reminiscing about, because the good old days were never good. They're reminiscing about the fact that they were young and full of hope, and life was brilliant for that reason, because they were young and fit and healthy, and the world was their oyster. And now they're knackered and can't afford any food. But that's the first thing. So that changes. The second thing is changing the electorate. You give 16, 17-year-olds the vote. You give settled EU citizens the vote.
Yeah,
and
that's a big one.
Should not
3
be
million
at
people.
All. Yeah, it shouldn't be at all controversial. Australians have the vote. They don't even have to be settled.
So what I see is, this is sort of the roadmap, and someone's put in the chat, Tim, that has said in the chat that it's inevitable that we will rejoin the EU, and I honestly believe that. I think we're going to see in the 2029 election, there's going to be a big push for putting it into the manifesto, for the Labour manifesto, an in or stay out referendum, and that would be delivered in the first year of that new Labour administration. So looking at 2030 at the earliest. I would say, because it was only 1 year into Cameron's second government that they had the the original in-out referendum. But also, I mean, you would see, I've spoken about referendums before and how I don't like them and how I find them very divisive, and you end up falling out with your neighbours over it, which you don't really do so much about particular policies. It's not like you have a stand-up row about goods shipments coming in from some far-flung nation with your neighbour. It's not something that comes up very often, or standards, I should say. But I do feel like something as monumental as rejoining the EU or Scotland getting independence should require a supermajority, or at least 60%.
The problem now is that there has been a referendum on both of those issues where a certain precedent, like the ones who sort of, the Conservatives would now like a supermajority for a sort of reversal of the position. But because there wasn't one at that time, it's like, well, you've now set a precedent. You know, what they should have had before they started all these referenda was say, right, how should we actually do them? Instead of doing it on a case-by-case basis, how should we do them? But no, they didn't do that. And now it's set. It's like it would look. Imagine how it would look if we require, and it might be that the EU require this, by the way, of an EU referendum to join. They may say, well, there's two sides to this now. It's not just up to you whether you join. We may not entertain the notion until you can get 60%, 65%, whatever. But let's say that's, not the issue there. Can you imagine a scenario where we just say there should be 60% support and there's 59% support, which is way more than there was to leave? I mean, if that wouldn't create a lot of political division in this country, I don't know what would.
Yeah. But I mean, I obviously this is something that still is quite raw for many people in the UK. I do get wound up by the argument that the EU won't have us back, because the EU, at the end of the day, it's a pragmatic organisation. It's not based on ideology.
No.
It would be foolish if Britain goes back with its tail between its legs and says, please, can I rejoin? To just say, no, you left. No. That was your decision.
The thing is, as well, that would actually do them harm, because we're in a position at the moment where you've got some people saying, like we're saying, we can't actually flourish until we're back. And there's some people say, no, the way we flourish is by actually doubling down on the crazy. But you've got those two things, we can flourish by staying out, we can flourish by going back. And that is a debate that is still raging. As soon as the EU say no, not just no, you're not ready or you need to meet these criteria, but just a flat no, you force the government of the day's hand, because they then cannot pursue that path. So they are then committed, whether they want to or not, to divergence, which is a huge problem for the EU, because what they did not want was Singapore on the Thames. Barney has said so many times. And you basically force, because what are Labour going to do? In order to win elections, they have to deliver. The Daily Mail won't cover for them. They have to deliver economic growth, absolutely every time.
Yeah.
How are they to do that if they cannot ultimately work on a path back to the EU? Well, they would have to do something completely off the wall.
So, one angry pagan saying, I don't think this absolutism is helpful. Labour know that we cannot just rejoin. Closer alignment is the best we can get right now. Be realistic. Yes. I don't know if angry pagan's talking to us, because I thought we were being realistic. But rejoining Erasmus, rejoining Horizon, rejoining the Interrail scheme, all that kind of stuff. We can do that now that we've got rid of the stupid UKCA standards that we were going to bring in. We were going to bring in different standards. The rest.
Well, we still technically have the different standards. It's just that we're now agreeing that the CE will always be equal or better than the UKCA.
Yeah, the CE that we do not have. This is the stamp on all electronic goods and things. The Conformité European, which says that it conforms to European standards that we no longer get a vote on, but we used to have a vote on.
Yeah.
And that's huge. I mean, it may seem like a little tiny technical thing, but it does mean that we have set ourselves up as a rule taker rather than a rule maker for the rest of eternity if we stay out of the EU. So I'll go back to what Femi said to me. It was Femi or Mike Galsworthy said to me just after we actually left the EU on the 31st of January 2020, and he said that this is the furthest away we're ever going to be from the EU. Every step we make now, we will be getting closer and closer. And that's very true. And it's one of the reasons why the Tories at the moment are really, really pushing this idea that we won't. I don't think we will, but we might leave the European Convention on Human Rights.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's just a complete non-starter, and they know it as well. Some of the nutters don't know it. Swella Braverman may not know it, but ultimately they know it.
She's a piece of work, isn't she?
Yes. But you know, I mean, I've just done a video. My second video today is on the idea, because there was another report. It's the second report in the last few weeks where someone who'd bought a house in Italy then discovered they're not allowed to piss and live in Italy, and they voted Brexit. But this latest one was even more stunning, because this particular person bought the house in 2021.
Yeah,
we'd already left the single market, mate. How did you not realize? How did you not check it out?
Was this the one in Crete?
No, this is Italy.
Oh, okay. I read one about someone in Crete who was
I'm sure there's been loads.
But
this particular one, do you know what was particularly mad about this? I actually got...
Was that the one where it was a couple and the woman voted to remain and the bloke voted to leave?
I think that was the other one. No, I can get it when people said we didn't think it'd affect our future plans. I get that, because, first of all, they were told it wouldn't, and specifically told, even if they weren't stupid, everyone campaigned to stay in the single market. Nigel Farage, Daniel Hannan, all of those people famously said, of course, we're not going to leave the single market. That'd be ridiculous. And so you could imagine those people would go, well, as long as we're still in the single market, I can retire to Italy. It's not a problem, is it? No. But this guy did it after we'd left the pissing single market. He spent over 100 grand buying a house and doing it up so he could run a B&B.
Yeah.
Only to then find out, after he spent all this money, oh, sorry, mate, you're not allowed to live in Italy.
Oh my God!
But you think that's not even peak stupidity. The stupidest thing of all was, because he now says he regrets it. Now I try not to be hard on people who say that, because we need people. It's harmful to us and the cause if people who change their mind think they're going to be ridiculed when they say so. So I don't ridicule people for changing their mind. What I ridicule them for is this. He said he voted for Brexit because he thought it would be easier to do that outside the EU. It would be easier for him to buy a house in Italy and live there and work there. And why did he think that? Because he had American friends who'd managed it. It's like, yeah, that doesn't mean it was easier for them. They just managed to do it. It was possible. Yeah. How can it be? We had absolute freedom of movement. We had the freedom. It was as easy for him to buy and basically set up a bed and breakfast in Italy as it was for an Italian. And now it is. How was he going to get more freedom than that?
Yeah, exactly.
So that needs ridiculing.
Yeah.
I don't ridicule most. That needs ridiculing.
I've got my own problem. There's with these people. Vendetta saying zero sympathy. I'm getting a bit annoyed about people who, as Vendetta was put in, why I'm against Brexit now that it's affecting me syndrome. And I do see that quite a lot. And although it is like, oh, Remainer now, okay, great, you've come across to the light side of the force. I'd like them to just apologize. I know that sounds like I'm asking a bit too much, but I want them to say, oh, I'm really sorry. Not that I just took my own rights away, but that I took your rights away. And I want to see that more.
Some people have, but I'm more, again, I'll go back to the outcomes. The outcome for me is we're back in the EU and we need these people. I mean, sure, if there's a cranky 97-year-old, it's like by the time we rejoin, you're not around anymore. I always feel really bad when I'm thinking of that, by the way. Yeah. Death is on our side. But
there is a glut of people who have a lot of money and a lot of political power and have views and opinions that are a little bit outdated, shall we say. Just a shout out to Fox in Clogs there. Thank you for the €10 super chat. It's irritating to many Europeans, me too, that many rejoiners are types who dislike the EU but will hold their noses to improve the UK economy.
That's the case in
Doesn't-
every country.
But
You've
is there
got
that
people.
many who are like that?
There's pragmatic remainers in every EU country.
Oh, yeah.
Very few.
The
Like
right-wingers.
so the way I described it is there was like to people in Europe, I get that the EU was always a very different thing to people in Britain because of that memory of, like, almost every country in Europe has memories of being invaded, living memory. But as those memories are becoming more distant, even for many people on the continent, it's less of an issue. So they're more like, for example, the Eastern European countries who joined the EU, they didn't join for that peace project. They joined for the economic benefits.
Well, I mean,
So
it's not a zero-sum game. I mean, they joined for
No,
many reasons, and
but
that was just one of
they-
them. But I've got to say, like, the rejoiners that I hang out with, we love the EU. We think it's a great idea, probably one of the best ideas that humans have ever come up with, which is saying something. And so we're not doing this just for economic reasons. Shout out to Frank there in the chat, who has put in a £5 super chat. Rejoining UK Horizon and Erasmus will help the UK. The issue is that the main beneficiaries will be those who already the main beneficiaries will be those who already did not want to leave the EU. Well, fair enough. But also, I wanted to come on to a point that Christian Cruz made a little earlier. As a citizen in the EU, what is the business case for us in the EU to let the UK rejoin? If we do nothing, every company and scientist that have interest in the EU will move here. And I get that, but let Phil have his opinion on this.
I was going to say they won't. We're still a huge economy, and we will remain a huge economy. Like, remember, the forecast is for our GDP to be 4% lower than the doppelganger. So that's a big chunk of our GDP, but it's by no means all of it. So you've still got these trade barriers in the way. You've also still got and it's not just trade of goods; it's people as well. There are skilled people in the UK. There are hubs of excellence. And it just makes it all that more difficult. I mean, you think about just one particular industry, Formula One. So big centre in Oxford, most of the top teams have their research bases there. Piece of piss travelling around Europe used to be.
Yeah. Well, my argument for that would be just based on just pragmatic competition. You don't want your biggest competitor to be literally on your doorstep. And that's the situation that the EU would have. And you're right. I mean, the UK, although we're not anywhere near where we should be at the moment, economically speaking, if we hadn't stupidly Brexited and had a bunch of clowns in charge for the last 13 years, it is still a significant, important power, an important economy. And that's you don't want your competition on your doorstep.
It's also a large consumer market as well. Because although we can't afford to have the same level of trade friction incoming as outgoing, there is still trade friction. There are still some EU businesses that just had to stop trading, had to stop exporting to Britain. And that's without the standards controls. So that's still customers lost. Yes, you may be able to find some more customers, but you could have done that anyway. You could have found more customers in the single market as well as kept the British customers. So, there's a large consumer market there. The business case is actually quite easy. It's the political case that's more difficult because it will be quite obvious when we do want to rejoin that what will have done it. It won't be people going, oh, yeah, we didn't realize it was a peace project. Oh, yeah, we're all on board with that. No, it'll be, we're sick of being poor and cold. Thank you.
Yeah. But I mean, there's things that the Brexit has done that still haven't kicked in. The big one, and you made a video about this week, didn't you? About they've kicked the can down the road again for the import controls into the UK for meat and dairy and all the things that can possibly get contaminated.
Yeah.
And therefore, because of the WTO rules of most favored nation, we can't give special dispensation to European nations who are bringing meat and dairy into our country without also opening that up to other countries like Brazil. Yeah. As a result of that, we are going to get a massive, it's going to happen. This is almost inevitable. We're going to have a massive food poisoning incident, aren't we?
Well, the biggest fear amongst like vets and farmers is because the biggest threat is from live animal exports.
Yeah.
So importing something like African swine fever, because that way you knacker British farms as well, because it'll get into their herds and whatever you call pigs. And that'll be that. it'll be back to BSE again.
Yeah.
And even though that was very quickly fixed, very quickly, we had the highest standards in the world, because you would after something like that. It was still many years before some countries would accept our inputs again. And that's partly because of natural reticence, but also because that country's own farmers will be, because we're their competition, they'll be badgering their government and saying, we'll tell the public you're risking their health if you import from them. So it took years before we could export against France even.
Isn't British beef still banned in Australia and in
I think
the
in
US?
Australia it still is, yeah. And it's, I don't know about the US, but I know it still is. I think it still is in Australia. And I think that again was because of their own farmers lobbying the government.
Yeah.
It was within a couple of years, it was the safest in the world. Because when something goes that badly wrong, the only way you have of restoring your reputation is you can't do anything in half measures. You have to do everything. You suddenly have to be the best in the world.
Yeah.
It's a bit like after the Dunblane shootings, we immediately tightened gun laws, to be like, and there are countries that don't, America don't, but normal countries will do that. When there's
loosen the laws.
Yeah, we need more guns.
More guns.
More guns. What about the children? We're not going to give guns to children. No, give them bulletproof backpacks, but everyone else has guns. So yeah, it's. But in normal countries, when you have a major crisis like that, you actually deal with it properly. Whereas, although you could argue these days, not so much, like you could look at Grenfell. I mean, after that, surely we should have massively clamped down on this. No.
Yeah.
And it's not just that there's not been any prosecutions. There's not even been real moves to make sure it can't happen again.
Yeah. Well, Christian Cruz has just put the competition to the EU is not the UK. It's the US and China. Yeah, on that kind of level, yes. But having a major economy, and it's the only one in the area, really, that's not part of either the EU or, the EU project in some way, like being part of Schengen or the customs customs agreement or the customs union even, or the single market, or have lots and lots of individual trade deals like what Switzerland do. They want all the big economies in the area to be part of the EU, and that is,
and everyone wants the same thing. So, for example, the CPTPP, which we've joined for whatever reason, and even they don't, they just see it as whatever. They want China to join that. That's who they want to join it. Countries around America obviously wanted to be in the same club as the United States.
Yeah.
You need like the EEC, as it was, sort of created the template for successful interlinked trade. I mean, the reason they did it was for peace. It was like, well, you can't go to war against each other if it would collapse your economy. Whereas, but it became such a successful economic project that other countries around the world, although no one has ever gone as far as the EU, but they've all sort of seen the benefit in lowering trade friction between their neighbours and themselves.
Of course. And then you've got like ECOWAS, you've got CARICOM, you've got Mercosur, all these big trade blocs that are looking at the EU for inspiration. But I mean, you could argue that the inspiration for the EU could come from the US. The US isn't 50 different countries. It's a federalized system, but they can all trade with the same currency around, and you can move to any part of the US and live there.
There are some barriers.
One state in the US to say, right, we're leaving the USA on its own would be madness, even if it was Mississippi. One Angry Pagan's asking us, do you know anything about Starmer sending MPs to the EU to mend ties proactively?
This has been happening for years.
Yeah,
they've been doing this a long time.
So yes is the answer. The short
David
answer
Lamb has been there quite regularly.
And David Faulkner has dropped in 38 Hong Kong dollars. Thank you very much, David. Is there anything in the UK that the Tories haven't destroyed?
Corporate profits are doing quite well.
Cronyism.
Yeah, but in terms of any part of the national infrastructure, no, it's all worse.
Are the rivers not better now that they're full of sewage and that swimmers are getting...
E. coli is doing quite well out of it. I'm not sure who E. coli is sponsoring. But yeah.
But when we turn on the news in the last couple of weeks, I mean, we've the last couple of months, last few years actually, it's just been unprecedented climate change, and we've got wildfires now in Maui in Hawaii, which seems mad to me
Yeah.
because it's a very wet environment for there to be
Yeah.
actual fires there. It's just pretty unnatural. You had the massive smoke cloud from Canada that went over New York City, creating those apocalyptic scenes there. Wildfires raging in Greece, in Spain. We've had these fires, obviously, that we normally have in California and in Australia, just getting completely out of hand. And we're seeing all this, and I presume that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is seeing it as well. And his response isn't horror. It's, oh,
Yeah, but
crap,
he
we
doesn't
better...
necessarily just because he sees it doesn't mean to say he understands it. There's a lot of remember, again, it's sometimes quite difficult to separate what is grifting, in other words, someone who knows the situation but they're turning it to their own personal advantage, and someone who's genuinely ignorant. There's plenty of top politicians, even a prime minister, even a head of government, who can actually be ignorant. There's a lot of money in lobbying, particularly Conservatives, to try and persuade you that this thing, don't you remember? Was it not warm in summer when you were young? But also, even when they have to concede, yeah, this is unprecedented, but it's also a natural cycle. So you're assuming that Rishi Sunak, just because he has access to advisors, believes in anthropogenic climate change. He may not.
But if he did believe in it, why would he give 100 licenses to drilling companies?
Because he then goes along with the Tom Harwoods, who will say, "Oh yeah, but even if we behaved ourselves, it's like a drop in the ocean compared to China." There's all sorts of.
No, it's not.
I know.
We're a massive
but
economy.
That's what they say,
and we have influence around the world.
Yeah, but that's what they say. So and you're assuming that Rishi Sunak is aware of this and just doesn't care. He may just be falling for the bollocks himself.
Yeah,
we don't know. He's not a scientist. He's a guy as old as he's slightly younger than I am, and he's got no background in science.
We did have
he's got no interest
Prime
in
Minister
it.
who had a degree in science, didn't we?
Well, yeah.
We had Thatcher,
Margaret Thatcher.
Degree in chemistry from Oxford University. Yeah. And she could read a scientific paper. And when she read the scientific paper about the thinning of the ozone layer in the 1980s, she went, oh dear, we should do something about this. And Britain led the world in the worldwide banning of CFCs. Yeah. We did that because we had a leader, and I'm no fan of Thatcher by any stretch of the imagination, but we had a leader who could read a scientific paper and go, oh dear, we need to do something about this. And furthermore, we need to get other countries to do something about it as well.
That's what I think
power
is the
Britain
issue.
has.
Yeah, but that's also what I think was the issue. Rishi Sunak doesn't. So he can be told, oh, scientists are saying that, and he can also be told, oh, they're just making a fuss. Actually, you'll find, oh, look at this graph. Oh, yeah, I understand graphs. Yeah, do you see how this graph shows that it's actually fine? He doesn't. He can't distinguish between a grifter and someone telling the truth. Yeah. So it's actually entirely possible that he may not care. He may just think he's rich enough, do you know what, to find some part of the world to live in that is the least affected, right in the middle of America or something. He could just be thinking that. He could just think, it'll be fine, or we'll leave it to other governments because I'm only making my money for a year. What harm can I do in one more year? Right? There's all sorts of things he could be telling himself, but he fundamentally also may not understand.
Big shout out to John Bull there for the £5 super chat. Really appreciate it. We've got some suggestions coming in for who's done well under the Tories. Private health and private schools and health clinics are doing well, says Andrew Ray. We've also got offshore bank accounts doing quite well. John Morter says community pantries, which are now what food banks are called, have increased under the Tories. To be fair,
do they? No one really gains from those. You have to sacrifice your time.
Isn't that really embarrassing though that you have the Tory MPs who go to the opening of a food bank and post pictures of it on social
Yeah,
media,
they
and
love
you're
it.
just like, but
They love it.
it's like, you know, if crime had gone up 1,000% under the Tories,
Yeah, but
and they
they
were
don't.
turning up outside courts with the thumbs up because someone was
But they're
going to
not
jail.
though. This is like the people being arrested. It's the outcome. They're saying it's people. For them, they're associated with people being fed. And also the fact it's their big. It's going back to David Cameron's big society. Do it yourself. The people who could be. It's a bit like when you say something like, you know, I should be taxed more. I earn enough to be taxed more. And they go, well, why don't you just give more money to the Treasury then? No, because my extra contribution is not going to make anything, is it? We need everyone at my level of income to be taxed more.
Yeah, it's usually like, oh, you support asylum seekers, do you? Well, why didn't you take in an asylum seeker? And I'm like, okay, is there a mechanism to do that at the moment? No, there isn't, unless they're from Ukraine. Then you
But even if you can't, it doesn't matter. They still pay their taxes.
Yeah.
We pay enough taxes to deal with all this. We used to deal with it all. It used to be fine. And then it wasn't. Why was it? Because did we suddenly start paying less in tax? No, we didn't. We're not paying less in tax under the Tories. We're paying more. Historically, the highest since Britain was just recovering from the Second World War.
Yeah. There's a comment in the chat from earlier with Liam North mentioning about how Brexit basically just ruined his life, and now he's just written that he's hardly left his bed in 3 years as a result of things that happened, Brexit and also COVID as well. But I'm really sorry, Liam, and my heart goes out to you. And I just hate the fact that so many people have had their lives completely turned upside down by the actions of this corrupt cronyism government that is just in it to feather their own nests.
Yeah, some of the cruelest ones, in terms of when we'll go back to like sympathy for some Leave voters, there were some, and I saw, you know, some interviews of some people. Like I remember this one woman in particular, but there are lots of people like this with a very ill child, obviously Tory town, difficult to get right medical treatment. So of course she'll jump on anything that means the NHS is going to be better. So she voted Leave because she was told more money for the NHS. And now you think to yourself, so now that she knows the truth, she's got this very ill child, it's even harder to get medical treatment now. And she was doing that for her child. And what she's actually done is vote to screw her child over. So, you know, some people have to come to that realization as well.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's a bit depressing. Thank you very much to Jamie Ritterhouse there for the $2 super chat, super sticker, little smiley fox. I think it's a fox. And then Andrew Ray saying, who started the privatization of dental clinics and private hospitals? Someone called Tony Blair. Correct me, please.
Yeah, well, PFI, I was very much against, in terms of like 3 things that Tony Blair did that I would absolutely kick him in the balls for. Iraq.
PFI.
Certainly not even apologizing for it.
Yeah.
There would be PFI, and then there would be not introducing PR.
Yes. I would add to that doing absolutely nothing about public transport while they're in power. Next to nothing.
Well, I mean,
putting the kibosh on the trams in Liverpool that we had a Lib Dem government and local government at the time. They wanted to bring trams into Liverpool, and we needed a few million from the government, which is hardly anything. I mean, we spend that on fixing a bridge, and they said no.
I mean, things like that are just they're no government's going to get everything right. I mean, you know, but when I think of the things that have got far-reaching effects, like really into now, the PFI argued the least of them because the Tories would have just done it anyway. So in terms of where we are now, you could argue it would have made no difference. But the fact is that Labour did do that, and they shouldn't have done. Yeah. I understand why they did it as well. I understand that it was a case of, well, because it's back to the old problem of we can't just borrow heavily for this investment, and we need this investment because otherwise you just get accused of tax and spend and borrow. But at the same time, you know, the long-term thinking wasn't there. They were still making improvements. Like politically, they could have made less progress with the NHS and voters would still appreciate, because it was still progress, and it was still noticeable progress. So even given that the level of investment would have been lower without it, it would have been more sustainable.
We've had Michael in the chat adding housing. When Labour came to power in 97, the average house price was 4.5 times average salary. When they left in 2010, it was 8.7 times.
No, it wasn't 8.7. That was specifically that little. No, it wasn't. It went up a little. It didn't go up that much. It's about that now. It's only about 9 now. No, it wasn't 8.7. It did go up a bit, but the house building, there were loads more houses built under Labour than there have been under the Conservatives, and affordable housing as well. It's not just about, like, the Tories at the moment, when they're trying to fiddle the stats, they talk about starts, but people can't move into like foundations. So it's like finishing houses. In fact, I don't know how. Unfortunately, it's too late now. I probably can't find it quickly enough.
But one of the things that I did like in the last Labour conference was this idea of the starting Great British Power, and obviously getting rid of the ban on onshore wind farms and things. Because one of the things I was thinking about is how nearly everything that Labour did, well, lots of things that Labour did in the 13 years they were in power, have now been undone by the Tories in the 13 years that they were in power. But when it comes to things like infrastructure, it's harder to get rid of that within a short space of time. Yeah. And so for something like, and also like PR as well, someone put in the chat that they voted for Labour twice between 97 and 2010 because they said they were going to bring PR, and then they didn't. That once the genie's out the bottle, it's going to be absolutely impossible not absolutely impossible, but very improbable that people will vote first past the post back in. Yeah. Once that's done, that's done. End of. Which is why the EU thing is quite interesting, because we had a referendum in 1975, which was 65% Remain in the EEC, and yet the question never went away, and it won't go away this time either until we rejoin. And even when we do rejoin, I don't think that's going to shut the likes of Farage and
oh no, he loves it. I'm sure he hated it when we left the EU, because then all of a sudden he wasn't quite sure how he was going to make any money. Well, I've just seen here
he was kicked out of his bank.
When Labour left, the average house price to earnings ratio was like just over 5, whereas as of the start of this one only goes up to the start of 2022, and it's like 7, but I'm pretty sure it's up to about I think it's much higher now. I think it's like 8, somewhere between 8 and 9. But it did go up under Labour, certainly. Yeah.
But then wages went up under Labour. We got a national minimum wage, which the same gobshites who resist everything, we were trying to resist that and say, oh, we'll close down businesses, and it'll do all this, and it didn't. Although
and you know what,
Wilco's gone to administration, hasn't it?
When this all comes back and they try saying the same thing about his next economic policy, oh, it'll damage businesses. Keir Starmer needs to get used to a particular phrase. In an argument with your partner, and you'll go, oh yeah, what about and such a time? Obviously always play when that one time you were right. And he can say that, oh, didn't you say the same thing about minimum wage? Oh yes, good one. So he needs to trawl that out every time they try and use it against him. Oh, but this will destroy businesses. Oh yeah, you said that about minimum wage, and then businesses.
We said that about Brexit, and it did. Thank you very much to Christine Cash for the $5 there thrown into the super chat fund. Thank you very much. People have been very generous today on the old super chats with a lovely lemon. So one of the things that we keep mentioning on Labour Social is that YouTube have a policy seemingly of I don't know, especially for us, but most of the videos that we do live, they get limited adverts. So any super chats we can get when we're live are very, very much appreciated, because it's probably going to be the only amount of money we get for doing this stuff, doing these vids anyway. But yeah, should we leave it at that? We're 10 past 2 now. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention today about politics this week. It has been a bit quiet.
I mean, there's been lots of
obviously the
stuff
one
happening, of course, but then we'd end up at another half an hour if we started another topic.
But yeah, I mean, I can see that the Tories are really well. I can see. From my point of view, it looks like the Tories really are clutching at straws at the moment, just trying to do anything and say anything to cling on to power, or at least
Yeah.
see the polls like just tick slightly upwards for them, and nothing's
Yeah.
working.
But they get very excited when that does happen, though. And it does happen because they go up. And if you look at a long-term trend of any poll, they're up and down all the time. And every time they go a little bit up, they throw it all over Twitter. And every time it's a little bit down, they just say nothing. But it's the general trend. And they know the general trend is flat for them. You know, there was that bounce back after Liz Truss, and there it is. And what's particularly galling for Sunak is it's below the level when Boris Johnson was about. And it would have ended up going down under Johnson because of all the stuff that was to come in that autumn of 2022 anyway, even if Liz Truss hadn't been let loose on the finances. But as far as Boris Johnson's allies are concerned, you know, the poll lead for Labour was like, well, they're really bad at maths. They diminish it even then. But it was like, it was about 12%, 12-point gap. Now it's like 25. Or, well, not 25 at the moment, 22 at the moment, I think, on YouGov. But it has been about 25. It'll get to 25 again at some point. And what must be especially galling for them, and I can't understand why Labour are not using this summer to make speeches. You know, there's nothing in the news. The journalists are going around going, pissing hell, is there a cat stuck up a tree we can report on? And shouldn't this be a great time for Labour to go out and do a major policy speech?
Yeah. Big shout out to Eurosh there for the €20 super chat. Labour is not speaking about rejoining the EU because they realise it would be far more difficult than leaving was, and even that took 3 Tory prime ministers.
Yeah, well, it is because it's not just our decision. Leaving was our decision, and that took us long enough. Joining is not just our decision.
Sam has just asked on the chat, and thank you for the £2 super chat there. Seen the latest on the Bibby Stockholm? Yes, we mentioned it at the start of the show, actually. So the Bibby, for those who just joined us, the Bibby Stockholm has been evacuated because of an outbreak of...
It's not safe, basically.
The
bacterium.
Legionella. Is it Legionella?
Yeah. I mean, we just call it Legionnaire's disease, don't we?
That's which gets into water systems and also into AC systems. And basically, if you drink it, you get very, very, very ill.
Yeah.
So, this is just one of the many problems that come from housing people on boats.
Yeah. It's also, again, it's just lack of Tory thinking, isn't it? It's everyone say, oh, it's not safe. Ah, rubbish. How did they go? Oh, we're going to have to take them off now. Why are you taking them off? Oh, it turns out it's not safe. They can't even get evil right. They can't even do evil right. That's quite good. I don't know. I keep complaining because incompetent evil is always way better than clever evil. Isn't
it? Exactly. We've got someone in the chat saying there's 492 people watching and only 6 likes. But I'm looking at likes. We've got 146 likes. But if you do want to drop a like in, it won't cost you anything. Just that'll be great and possibly help our algorithm. Maybe we won't get our videos all limited so much. That would be nice. Anyway, right. So let's wrap it up there. Thank you very much for everyone for your amazing comments, and there's the discussions going on in the chat while we're talking as well, which is nice. If anyone does want to discuss stuff, feel free to head over to the Discord server, the Labour Social Discord server, which everyone who is a Labour Social patron or a member of this channel should have access to. If you don't, please get in touch with me and let me know, and I'll sort that out for you. I will be back at 9 o'clock tonight for the Labour Social, where we'll be having a few drinks and absolutely ripping the living hell out of Neanderthal, I think. Phil, are you going to be around for that?
I probably am around actually tonight, yes.
Ooh. Well, if you fancy joining us, you'd be very, very welcome. I'm sure there's some people on the chat there who would like to see you opine on the situation. But before we go, I just wanted to come back to what you were just talking about. Why aren't Labour just getting all the headlines at the moment just by coming out and making speeches? I don't get it. I had this conversation with a bunch of Lib Dems in the Lib Dem conference of 2018, down in Brighton, where I was like, just say you're going to legalize drugs. And they're like, what? I'm like, just say it. Just, you're not going to win. Just say you're going to legalize drugs. And then every single front cover of every single newspaper for the next week is going to be Lib Dems want to legalize drugs. Yeah. And then you'll open a discussion where people will be like, well, maybe we should. But at least it gets the Lib Dems into people's minds. And one of the things that I think has been a bad thing that's come from all these new indictments against Donald Trump in the US is he's on the bloody news every day now. Yeah.
Oh, his popularity's increased.
Yeah, there was a nice situation where there was about 2 years where you just didn't see him. He just he wrote some things on Truth Social.
But he also managed to piss off some of his supporters because he wasn't as crazy on COVID as they. He thought they should get vaccinated, for example.
Yeah.
And you know, he was shitting the bed with his own supporters at times.
Yeah.
But now it's like it's like the fortress mentality's kicked in because they're attacking our Donald.
Yeah.
They're the witch hunt.
Yeah, he's the only thing standing between me and being arrested by the government. Yeah. But yeah, very frustrating. But the same MO that he had in the 2016 election, when people would say every time Hillary Clinton does something stupid, Donald Trump steps in front of her and does something even more stupid. Yeah. And that was a policy. That was a strategy, I should say, of Donald Trump, because he wanted to be on the front cover of all the newspapers and on all the news sites every day.
Yeah.
Which he did. So shout out to Helen Wilkes before we go. £3 super chat. Thank you very much. Asking how's it going. It's going.
Just say about Andrew as well. He's just asked about the conference. We are at the conference this October, and we do have a thing.
We do have two things, actually. We've got a thing that's actually in the conference for the people who will be going, and that's on the Tuesday of the conference. But on the Monday night, the night before, at 5 p.m. at the Camp and Furnace venue in the Baltic Triangle in Liverpool, it'll be me and Phil and Femi and Supertansky talking about social media and Labour. So, and anyone can go to that. It's not within the perimeter of the conference, so please turn up to that if you're in the area. Be good to see you at IRL, as they say. So that's about it for us. Thank you very much for joining us, and until next time, I'll say hello, good evening, welcome, and goodbye.